If being nice was the key to success, the world would be run by kindergarten teachers and Boy Scouts, but it's not. The bitter truth is people pleasers don't win. They get used, ignored, and overlooked. Why? Because the world doesn't reward those who play not to lose. It rewards those who dare to play to win. Ladies and gentlemen, we have been sold a lie. The cultural narrative goes like this. If you're agreeable, if you're polite, if you always say yes and never rock the boat, then everything you want, respect, love, success, will just come to you. But it doesn't, does it? In fact, the more some men give, the less they seem to receive, and they wonder why. Let me tell you why nice guys finish last. So no, nice guys don't finish last because they're nice. They finish last because they've mistaken passivity for goodness, safety for virtue, and fear for humility. You don't need to be less kind. You need to be more formidable. Be a man who can wield the sword and keeps it sheathed. That's who finishes first. Let me know if you'd like this adapted for a specific audience, such as a corporate event, university talk, or men's retreat. Many so-called nice guys aren't operating from a place of genuine moral strength. They're operating from fear. They believe that if they simply avoid conflict, always agree, and never express a controversial opinion, they'll be rewarded for their pleasantness. But let's be honest, that's not moral courage, that's avoidance. And avoidance is not virtue, it's cowardice dressed up as agreeableness. The confusion arises because we've collapsed two ideas, being nice and being good. They're not the same. Being good requires strength, clarity, and often the willingness to upset people. Goodness is the man who tells the truth when it's inconvenient, who holds his ground when pressured to fold, who risks being disliked in order to do what is right. That's moral strength, that's character. Niceness, on the other hand, is often just the art of self-erasure. It's the slow suicide of a man who would rather betray himself than offend someone else. You see this pattern emerge early in life. The boy who learns to avoid disapproval by always saying yes, by always smiling, by never expressing anger, that boy is rewarded in the short term with praise. He becomes the good kid. But what no one tells him is that this script won't work when he grows up. The world doesn't reward silent compliance. It rewards those who know who they are, what they stand for, and are willing to risk the consequences of asserting that. People don't trust those who are always nice. Deep down, they suspect there's something inauthentic about them, and they're usually right, because the nice guy rarely says what he really thinks. He censors himself constantly. He tells others what he believes they want to hear, not what he truly believes. Over time, this erodes his identity. He becomes a ghost of himself, agreeable on the surface, but hollow within. Worse still, his relationships suffer. Romantic partners lose respect for him. Friends stop taking him seriously. Employers pass him over. Why? Because they sense he has no edge, no backbone, and no ability to take a stand. And it's not because he lacks capacity, it's because he's never developed it. He's never learned to tolerate the discomfort of conflict, to hold tension, to say no with authority. His fear of rejection has neutered him. Being good isn't about being liked, it's about being principled. And until a man realizes that niceness without boundaries is not a virtue, but a liability, he will continue to finish last, not because the world is cruel, but because it responds not to fear, but to strength. The world does not bend to the will of those who simply follow rules and wait their turn. It responds to those who take responsibility, who demonstrate competence, and who are willing to. The nice guy often prides himself on being calm, composed, and non-confrontational. He believes that by suppressing his anger, his ambition, and even his sexuality, he's becoming a better man, more mature, more evolved, more lovable. But that suppression is not virtue, it's repression. And repressed emotion doesn't dissolve, it transforms. It doesn't disappear, it festers. What lies unspoken becomes what controls you. What you ignore begins to define you from the shadows. That is the hidden tragedy of the so-called nice guy. He believes he is in control, when in reality, He's being controlled by everything he refuses to face. Anger, for instance, is not inherently bad. It is a signal of biological and psychological reaction that something is wrong, that a boundary has been violated, that injustice has occurred. When a man continually suppresses his anger in order to appear agreeable, he doesn't become more virtuous, he becomes more resentful. He simmers beneath the surface, he grits his teeth behind fake smiles. He tolerates things that violate his integrity, thinking he's being mature when in reality, he's losing his soul one compromise at a time. Over time, this kind of repression breeds resentment, not just toward others, but toward himself. He starts to hate the version of himself that always says yes, that backs down, that plays small, that apologizes for existing, and that resentment leaks out in all kinds of ways: passive-aggressive comments, bitterness in relationships, emotional numbness, even depression. The man who never allows himself to feel his anger openly often ends up weaponizing it in covert, destructive ways. The problem is not the anger. The problem is the fear of what that anger might reveal. If a man has never been taught how to confront conflict directly, how to express his frustration with dignity, how to assert himself without exploding, then he sees anger as a threat, a sign of failure. But that's wrong. Uncontrolled anger is dangerous, yes, but mastered anger, disciplined, integrated anger is a source of power. It's the energy that fuels boundaries, conviction, and courage. The nice guy avoids this integration. He chooses comfort over confrontation, peace over strength, safety over growth. But in doing so, he remains a fraction of who he could be. Until he faces what he fears inside himself, until he learns to integrate, not exile, the more aggressive and assertive parts of his nature, he will continue to live a quiet life of resentment, wondering why no one takes him seriously. The man who is truly respected is not the one who is merely kind, but the one who has the capacity for power and chooses to control it. This is a critical distinction. Society has misunderstood what makes a man good. It's not the absence of aggression or strength, it's the mastery of it. A man who is incapable of being dangerous is not virtuous, he's harmless, and harmlessness is not a virtue, it's a deficiency. A child is harmless, a weak man is harmless, but a man who can be formidable, who knows the extent of his capacity to assert, to fight, to dominate, and yet chooses discipline, that is the man others follow, respect, and trust. People are drawn to strength, but not brute strength, composed strength, the kind of strength that doesn't need to prove itself through yelling, violence, or chaos. The man who can remain calm in the midst of provocation, who doesn't lash out in fear or insecurity, but who stands his ground with controlled intensity, that is the man who commands attention. He doesn't beg for approval. He doesn't bend to please others. He knows who he is, and more importantly, he knows what he is capable of. This capacity for controlled danger is what separates leaders from followers. It's what allows a man to set boundaries, to protect those he loves, to walk into difficult conversations with clarity and force. It's not enough to be agreeable. That makes you likable, but not influential. Influence, in its mature form, is born from the tension between potential destruction and conscious restraint. The man who cannot fight will always be ruled by those who can. And yet, many men, particularly those raised to be perpetually polite, suppress their darker instincts instead of understanding them. They fear their assertiveness, their competitiveness, their intensity, thinking that these traits make them bad or dangerous. But the truth is, when those traits are left in the unconscious, unexamined, and undisciplined, that's when they become dangerous. When a man integrates those parts, when he brings them into the light and learns to direct them, he becomes someone others instinctively respect. Not because he intimidates them, but because they sense he has nothing to prove and everything under control. A man must be capable of power, not enslaved by it. The world is not in need of more harmless men. It needs more dangerous men who are good men, who have fire in their chest, and the wisdom to keep it in check. That is not just admirable, it is essential. We live in a culture that has encouraged men to be agreeable, compliant, and emotionally subdued, often under the illusion that this is the path to love, respect, and success. But the truth is, the world does not reward submission, it rewards value. And value is not determined by how inoffensive you are. It's determined by how much strength, clarity, and responsibility you're willing to shoulder. The tragedy of the so-called nice guy is not that he's too kind, but that he has traded away his authenticity in order to be accepted. And in doing so, he loses both the respect of others and the deeper connection to his own potential. Kindness without strength is not virtue. It's a strategy to avoid discomfort. And avoidance is the quiet killer of masculine development. The nice guy represses his anger instead of mastering it. He hides his ambition instead of pursuing it. He silences his truth to keep the peace. But peace at the expense of integrity is not peace itself, betrayal. And over time, this inner dissonance becomes unbearable. It turns into resentment, into passivity, into emotional numbness. The nice guy becomes a shadow of himself, wondering why his efforts to please everyone have left him lonely, unfulfilled, and unseen. But the way forward is not to swing into bitterness or arrogance. It's to integrate strength with compassion, assertiveness with kindness, power with purpose. A man must learn to be dangerous, not recklessly, but consciously. He must be capable of standing his ground, telling the truth, and making hard decisions, not because he seeks domination, but because he refuses to be dominated by fear. True masculinity is not about aggression or submission. It's about controlled intensity, knowing the beast within and choosing deliberately to guide it rather than unleash it blindly or bury it in shame. So why do nice guys finish last? Because they have yet to realize that their niceness is not the issue, their lack of strength is. A man must be both gentle and formidable, both kind and unapologetically honest. He must become someone who can lead, protect, and build, not by sacrificing his soul for approval, but by embracing the full spectrum of his potential. Only then does he stop finishing last. Only then does he become a force to be reckoned with, not through fear, but through earned respect. Thank you for taking the time to engage with this message. If it challenged you, made you think, or stirred something deep within, that's exactly the point. Growth rarely comes from comfort, and the first step to becoming more is facing the truths we often avoid. I appreciate your attention, your presence, and your willingness to go deeper. If you found value in this, consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it too. Let's not keep these conversations in the dark. Until next time, stand tall, speak truth, and remember, you were never meant to stay small. Thank you and goodbye.